Good evening. My name is Sarah Bodo, and I'm a project manager with the National Park Service. Thank you for joining this public meeting tonight on the General Management Plan for Valles Caldera National Preserve. We will be recording the presentation so that anyone who misses tonight's meeting can watch this or have the opportunity to watch this. And then we will post a recording of this presentation on the project website next week. And we'll also announce it by social media at that time. Tonight, you'll hear from myself and Jorge Silva Benuelos, who is the superintendent of Valles Caldera National Preserve. And I'd just like to say we're both delighted to be speaking with you tonight and sharing this general management plan. Also tonight, we have several of our colleagues from the National Park Service joining us. And those are employees of Valles Caldera, as well as staff from our regional office and our support office called the Denver Service Center. After the presentation, we will hold a question and answer session. We believe the presentation will be about 30 to 45 minutes, so that should leave us with plenty of time to hear your questions about the plan. All right, just wanted to go over some instructions for this virtual meeting. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you should be able to adjust the volume. And then in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you can turn on and off the question and answer panel. And that looks like a dialogue comment bubble question. So after the presentation today, we will invite you to type questions into the Q&A panel. And just feel free to do that throughout the presentation and afterwards. We won't be responding to questions until after the presentation. We do have a lot of information to share. So some of the questions you may have may be answered over the course of the presentation. But once we wrap up, we're more than happy to address any additional questions or provide any clarification on anything we mentioned. I also want to say that we have real-time captioning tonight provided by Birnbaum Interpreting Services. And if you would like to use this live captioning service, please click on the link that is provided in the Q&A panel, which this slide has those instructions. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to invite you to review and comment on the two documents that are open for public review now through the end of the month. Tonight's agenda includes: first, we'll describe the planning process and provide some background. Second, we'll orient you to the two documents that we are seeking your review and comment on. Then we'll give instructions on how to share your feedback, and then we'll have the rest of the time for Q&A. We will end the meeting at 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And now I will introduce to you Jorge Silva Benuelos, the Park Superintendent, who will present agenda items 1 and 2.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I introduce the plan, I would like to acknowledge that Valles Caldera is of spiritual and ceremonial importance to numerous American Indian peoples in the greater Southwest region. We recognize that this is a regionally significant geographic and cultural focal point and a pivotal sacred place for numerous tribal groups. These cultural connections are both contemporary and of great antiquity, and we respectfully seek to uphold the values and prioritize the voices of the tribes and pueblos for whom this special place continues to be part of their practices, beliefs, identity, and history. Next slide. We'll now describe the planning process. Next slide. The planning area consists of the entire 88,900 acre congressionally legislated boundary of Valles Caldera National Preserve, as you can see here. To orient you to the park and current operations, to the southeast corner, Valles Caldera shares a boundary with the upper watershed of Bandelier National Monument. To the northeast, the park shares a boundary with the Pueblo of Santa Clara. And elsewhere, the park is adjacent to the Santa Fe National Forest. New Mexico State Route 4 traverses the southern portion of the park and serves as the only paved road within the park at the time. Near the western boundary of the park, there is a site known as Sulphur Springs, which contains some of the most significant geothermal surface expressions in the park, many of which are unique to New Mexico and rare in the United States. Branching north from State Route 4, the main entrance road, which serves as the only public entry point into the interior of the park, travels through Valle Grande, leading visitors to the park's welcome station in the middle of that immense grassland valley. Due to limited infrastructure, until last year, the welcome station had served as the only access control point in the park, which created an informal delineation between the park's front country and back country. Prior to 2024, to venture beyond the welcome station, visitors were issued a limited number of backcountry vehicle passes from that location. While not a topic of this presentation, the park is actively working on steps to implement front country infrastructure improvements to enhance vehicle access and recreational opportunities on the north side of Valle Grande and the Baca Ranch Cabin District. For example, for any of you who joined us for our 25th anniversary celebration in July, you will have noticed the new backcountry gate, parking area, interpretive trail, and new interactive exhibit in the Cabin District that are part of these visitor infrastructure enhancements. Beyond the Cabin District, a backcountry vehicle route provides visitors with vehicle access into the central and northern portions of the park for hiking, fishing, hunting, and other recreational activities. The existing trail network, shown in dotted lines on this map, consists almost entirely of legacy logging roads constructed in the 20th century by private landowners, some of which are also used as administrative vehicle routes. At an elevation between 8,000 to 11,000 feet, most of the park outside Valle Grande is inaccessible by vehicle in winter due to snow. Next slide. A General Management Plan, or GMP, is a broad document that the National Park Service utilizes to define long-term management goals over a 20 to 30-year horizon. It focuses on establishing a management vision that balances conservation of park resources with opportunities to establish meaningful connections with the park's resources and legacy. General management planning defines the desired natural and cultural resource conditions to be achieved and maintained over time, identifies the necessary conditions for visitors to enjoy and connect with the park's resources and values, and outlines the kinds and levels of management activities, visitor use, and development that will achieve desired conditions. In addition, Valles Caldera's GMP includes development concepts for enhanced visitor services and support infrastructure in the Valle Grande district. Next slide. As a starting point for the GMP, the National Park Service looks to the congressional intent found in the enabling legislation for the park unit, as well as the National Park Service Organic Act, which established the National Park Service, both of which are summarized in the park purpose and NPS mission statement. I'll read them briefly. Located in the Jemez Mountains of north central New Mexico, Valles Caldera National Preserve protects, preserves, and restores ecosystems and cultural landscapes within an outstanding example of a volcanic caldera for the purpose of education, scientific research, public enjoyment and use, and cultural continuity. And the National Park Service preserves unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. The Park Service cooperates with partners to extend the benefits of natural and cultural resource conservation and outdoor recreation throughout this country and the world. Next slide. The GMP is needed for multiple reasons. First, it is called for in the park's enabling legislation. It is needed to improve visitor experiences while preserving Valles Caldera's landscapes, resources, cultural connections, and habitats. The plan helps us address visitor vehicle access to and within the park, as legacy roads were not engineered or designed for public use, and to provide fundamental visitor services, including potable water, restrooms, parking, and trails that are accessible to all visitors, including people with disabilities. The NPS also needs to plan for the management of visitors at their current levels and proactively prepare for anticipated growth in annual visitation to the park. Next slide. Since 2015, the NPS has undertaken a significant planning workload, and many of these plans help to inform the GMP planning process. This includes a foundation document, cultural landscape inventory, historic resources study, historic structures report, wildlife management framework, natural resource condition assessment, facility investment plan, front country infrastructure improvement plan, and fire management plan. In 2021, the park conducted civic engagement and tribal consultation regarding draft management zoning concepts, which are being carried forward into the GMP. In 2022, we initiated the GMP and front country development concept plan. In 2023, we developed preliminary management concepts and ideas and sought feedback from the park's associated tribes and the public on those concepts and ideas. In 2024, up until now, in 2025, we developed the draft plan and associated environmental compliance documents. We are now seeking your feedback on the draft plan and environmental assessment. By February 2026, we hope to have a final plan and decision document completed. Next slide. Now, through the end of August, we are seeking your review and comment on two documents. The draft plan, its cover is shown on the left of the slide, and the environmental assessment, its cover is shown on the right. The draft general management plan and Valle Grande District Development Concept Plan includes our proposals for the park. The environmental assessment is a companion document required to satisfy the National Environmental Policy Act. It assesses the impacts of our proposals on park resources. We will provide a link to the documents in the Q&A tab. This is also the location where you may submit comments on the documents. Your comments will be read and considered by the planning team, and we will incorporate any changes into the final general management plan and development concept plan. Next slide. Next, I'll briefly review the proposals in the draft general management plan. Next slide. The draft general management plan and Valle Grande District Development Concept Plan is organized into three chapters: introduction, general management direction, and management strategies and actions, followed by various appendices listed here. Next slide. I'll jump to chapter 2 of the general management plan, which includes a key component of the plan, management zoning of the park. Next slide. Management zoning in the NPS is somewhat similar to zoning efforts conducted by a city or a town, where different areas are zoned for residential use, commercial use, and industrial use, for example. In the case of Valles Caldera, management zoning is needed to determine general types or intensities of development appropriate in geographically distinct areas of the park, preserve and protect fundamental resources and values, enhance visitor access, experiences, and opportunities in a sustainable way, and support and uphold the purpose for which the park was established. As you can see on this map, we have developed 3 zoning concepts and associated desired conditions within the park: a visitor engagement zone shown in blue, self-guided zone shown in orange, and backcountry self-reliance zone shown in light green. Additionally, the Banco Bonito area of the park in the southwest corner is currently not zoned, pending further consultation with the Pueblo of Jemez as part of the 2024 settlement agreement, which resolved the Pueblo's Aboriginal title claim against the United States. Broadly speaking, our proposals for management zoning seek to achieve our goal to provide a welcoming national park experience for all, while preserving the current undeveloped and remote setting and experience of the vast majority of the landscape. For this reason, the park deliberately established a smaller consolidated front country area. At less than 5% of the total park acreage and less than 1% where the park is envisioning larger development investments, these front country areas are relatively narrow compared to the size of the park. This is also consistent with what we've heard through our tribal consultation efforts. Specifically, most tribes have advocated that the NPS prioritize natural and cultural resource preservation and minimize the footprint of future development. They would also like to see the vast majority of visitors concentrated into a small footprint of the park. By minimizing the visitor engagement zone and development concepts therein, we believe the zoning scheme should have the effect with only a small percentage of total visitors exploring beyond that primary zone. More specifically, the visitor engagement zone, shown in blue, is located primarily in the Valle Grande district, along with the NM4 road corridor where it traverses the park, and one other node that extends into Sulphur Springs on the western side of the park. This zone is where most short-term visitors to the park will go. These easy-to-reach areas may have higher visitor use and visitor density. Visitors are provided with opportunities to experience, appreciate, and connect with park resources in a more developed setting. Most of the development, visitor services, and facilities in the park are in this zone, and some public roads in this zone would be open year-round. Visitors are offered a variety of opportunities for all ability levels, including on-site interpretation and education to learn about park resources. The self-guided zone, again shown in orange, is where visitors can venture away from the main hub of park activity and directly experience the sights and sounds of the natural landscape. The zone includes development and facilities that are dispersed and designed for low to moderate densities of visitors. This zone includes transportation corridors and trails to explore the park, and most facilities would occur within these corridors. Public roads in this zone would be open seasonally, and although a degree of self-reliance and outdoor skill is necessary, areas in this zone are not so remote that they require a high level of skill or preparation. Lastly, the backcountry self-reliance zone, shown in light green, encompasses large contiguous areas of the park where natural processes, ecosystem function, and wildlife behavior are prioritized. And visitors can experience solitude in diverse natural landscapes with few encounters with other visitors. Areas in this zone are remote and undeveloped, requiring a higher degree of outdoor skill and self-reliance. Beyond primitive trails and minimal signage, this zone has no maintained visitor facilities. For each zone, we have also included desired conditions or aspirational goals the park has for managing the areas. The full text may be found in the plan. Next slide. Next, we'll move to Chapter 3 of the General Management Plan, which contains the proposed management strategies. On the following slides, I'll share our proposals for visitor use and experience, visitor amenity area work, natural resource stewardship, cultural resource management, and tribal relationships and management of resources of traditional significance. Please note that the following proposals would be constructed or implemented over time as funding and other constraints allow. Especially costly actions would be implemented in phases, and some actions may not commence for 10 years or more into the future. Next slide. Proposals to enhance visitor experience include the following: establishing a visitor services area in the Valle Grande district near the NM4 entrance as a hub for four-season recreational activities. This is depicted as the blue icon with a building inside close to the junction of NM4 and the entrance road. This area would include amenities such as the visitor services area with interpretive and community areas, restrooms, potable drinking water, and retail space. The area would also include accessible trails, picnic areas, and parking. The plan proposes enhancements to visitor amenities, including vehicle access, parking, restrooms, water, interpretive exhibits, and trailhead access at Sulphur Springs and Redondo Meadow, as well as at Banco Bonito in consultation with Jemez Pueblo. The cabin district's focus will shift towards historic preservation, interpretation, and recreation, serving as a gateway to the backcountry. Access to the backcountry will be maintained via a gate north of the cabin district near Cerro Piñon. We will also enhance our efforts for resource protection, education to prepare visitors for responsible use of remote park areas. We'll also maintain groomed and ungroomed routes for skiing, snowshoeing, and other winter activities as feasible. Next slide. With regard to road system management, the park's road system will remain unpaved unless a new need arises, except for the main entrance road. Backcountry roads will be improved for access by low clearance vehicles. The park entrance road will be realigned to the western edge of Valle Grande to enhance scenic views of the area, preserve the historic setting of the Baca Ranch Cabin District, and mitigate flooding risk to the park's entrance road, which is a concern in its current location. Public vehicle access will be permitted on designated roads, including the entrance road and North Valle Grande Road, depicted in blue, between a future South Mountain trailhead to the southwest and Cerro Pinon trailhead to the northeast. On the western side of the park, we will establish public vehicle access to trailhead parking at Redondo Meadow and Sulphur Springs. And in consultation and collaboration with Jemez Pueblo, we desire to improve trailhead parking at Banco Bonito. Additionally, with a backcountry vehicle pass, public vehicle access will be allowed on the Central Caldera Road from Cerro Pinon, along Valle San Antonio and Valle Toledo roads, and along Sulphur Creek Road to Sulphur Springs. We are also proposing to continue to issue 35 backcountry vehicle passes daily in order to preserve and maintain the solitude and other desired conditions you can experience in the self-guided and backcountry zones of the park. Next slide. With regard to the park's trail network, we are proposing to maintain existing trailheads and trails until future decisions are made through a subsequent plan. In total, this plan proposes to maintain approximately 130 miles of trails, including 13 miles open to hiking only, 41 miles open to hiking and equestrian use, and 76 miles open to hiking, equestrian, and mountain biking. A future planning effort, such as a comprehensive trail and backcountry camping management plan, will address infrastructure at trailheads, identify and consolidate trail hubs, establish new trails, potentially decommission existing underutilized trails, enhance connectivity to regional trails, and identify zones for primitive backcountry tent camping. Lastly, in the Valle Grande district, the current entrance road will be maintained as an accessible, multi-use trail that we would also seek to groom in the winter for skiing and snowshoeing. New trails will be constructed in the NM4 Visitor Services area. A formal Jemez River trailhead will be established, and a boardwalk or natural surface trail will be built parallel to NM4. Next slide. The general management plan includes various actions for natural resource stewardship. I've highlighted a few on this slide, but to see them all, please take a look at the general management plan. We intend to implement the park's internal climate adaptation strategy in conjunction with relevant restoration strategies and climate adaptation plans to enhance natural resource stewardship and ecosystem resilience. We will continue invasive plant treatments, forest thinning, and prescribe burns while following the fire management plan to restore resource conditions and mitigate wildfire risks. We will focus on site-specific wetland restoration, monitoring significant thermal features, and conducting surveys for federally endangered and threatened species in preparation for future developments, while limiting artificial lighting to preserve dark night skies. And we will maintain partnerships for water quality and climate monitoring, implement restoration of both aquatic and terrestrial wildlife species, and identify wetland restoration areas to bank potential mitigation credits and enhance ecological health. Next slide. Cultural resource management actions include the following actions, as well as additional actions not highlighted here. Conduct comprehensive archaeological inventories across the park, prioritizing areas threatened by natural processes, park operations, or visitor use to meet current survey standards. Complete and update baseline and treatment documents for cultural resources, focusing on those at risk of or of significance to tribal nations, while developing frameworks for efficiently evaluating the eligibility of historic properties to the National Register of Historic Places. Develop park-specific framework for nominating historic properties to the National Register, including cultural landscapes, particularly targeting things like obsidian quarries and the Baca Ranch cabin area. Employ passive protection strategies, such as discrete signage to guide visitors away from sensitive archaeological sites, and monitor these resources for visitor impacts while developing adaptive management plans to address any disturbances. And finally, establish collaborative educational efforts for programming on archaeological site significance, establish an obsidian studies program, and improve museum collection management to enhance public appreciation and access to cultural resources. Next slide. The General Management Plan also includes a number of actions to continue to strengthen our relationships with tribal nations and management of traditionally significant resources, including setting up additional regular government-to-government meetings with tribal nations and increasing informal communication channels to enhance collaboration on resource management, education, and interpretation. Work with tribal nations to identify culturally significant resources and understand historical traditional uses while enhancing the protection of natural and cultural resources sensitive to their ancestral relationships. And collaborate with tribal nations on interpretive media, management plans, and access to sites for traditional uses, including considerations for temporary closures to protect those uses. Lastly, we will seek to continue to develop a management framework for Banco Bonito jointly with the Pueblo of Jemez as part of our ongoing efforts to implement the 2024 settlement agreement. That was a brief review of the proposals from the General Management Plan. Now I'll hand it back to Sarah Bodo, who will discuss the other document for the review, the environmental assessment. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jorge, for describing the General Management Plan's proposals. The second document that we are seeking your input and review on is the environmental assessment. The National Park Service completed this document to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. And here we just outline the 4 chapters and the appendixes that are included in the environmental assessment. We did analyze 3 alternatives: the no action alternative, the NPS preferred alternative, which is we call the new appropriate facilities alternative, which Jorge just outlined in his description of the plan. And we also analyzed a 3rd alternative called the adaptive reuse alternative. Chapter 3 of the environmental assessment includes an evaluation of the environmental consequences of implementing each of these alternatives. All right, so that was our brief orientation to the documents that we're looking for feedback from you on. So now we're kind of getting to the most important parts of this meeting, which is discussing your role in helping with this planning effort. So we really do want your feedback, and we will read every comment, every letter that you provide to us and consider those comments. We want you to know that your comments will really help us ensure that we have the best plan possible and that we have considered everything that we do need to consider. I also want to thank those of you that have already commented and those of you that have met with us in the past or provided feedback in the past. We were able to incorporate much of that feedback and just wanted you to know that we really do value it and consider it. We are particularly interested in your thoughts on the questions on this slide, and you will see these questions on the project website as you provide that feedback. And then I also wanted to note that the draft general management plan is a draft. We will be finalizing it following this comment period, and we will publish a final plan, again, approximately in February of 2026. And then for the environmental assessment, any changes will be noted in a decision document, and that will also be published. All right, how do you submit feedback? There are 2 ways to provide your written comments. We do prefer the online option, which we have posted that link in the chat, but we also accept hard copy comments to this address listed here. And just as a reminder, please comment now through the end of the day on August 31st. And here is just an image of the website when you get to the project website, where you can see those documents and provide your comments. The documents are found if you scroll to the bottom of this page. There's links to them. You can download them. And then if you click on the green Comment Now button, that's how you can submit your comments. I also wanted to note that in addition to tonight's meeting, there are additional opportunities to meet with the park staff and learn more by attending one of the community events that park staff will attend this month. As you can see, some have already occurred, and there are 4 more planned for this weekend the next 2 weekends. We also will provide a link to the website where the park will keep that list up to date if they add a few more options for coming and talking to the staff. All right, now we're ready to get to the Q&A portion. So as a reminder, you can click in the upper right-hand corner to toggle your Q&A panel on and off. And then once you get there, there's a purple button at the bottom of the screen that says ask a question, and you click on that and you can type in your questions. All right, so we have been collecting your questions so far. So we're going to take a quick break just to get them organized, and we'll be back in like 1 to 2 minutes to answer as many as we can. We also, feel free to use this time to just write in more questions for us. I will say that if you want to provide official public comment, don't do it through the Q&A. We really want those comments in a written form on our park website or turned into the address listed here. So tonight is really for clarifying questions, things you're curious about, something we touched on that is maybe confusing or you want more information on. All right, with that, I'm going to go off camera and just take about a 1-minute pause, and we'll come right back. Okay. So the first thing I want to mention is that unfortunately we made an error on this slide that I'm sharing right now. The mailing address is incorrect, so don't write to that PO box. We will put the address in the Q&A panel, and I'll try to get it up on the screen here in a second too. So let's go to our questions, and the first question is about grazing, trespass grazing. So this person said, it's a big topic. Little mention of grazing is made in the GMP. Does the park plan to update the livestock operations plan and specifically say that all of the park is closed to grazing except the legal pasture in your GMP? Jorge, would you like to respond to that question about trespass grazing?
Sure. So, great question. Livestock grazing per National Park Service regulations at 36 CFR already prohibit grazing of livestock without a park permit. So that in and of itself prohibits any sort of trespass cattle from entering the park, and there are citations that can be issued for that activity. With regard to grazing in general, the parks enabling legislation does include a provision that states that the park shall authorize livestock grazing for two specific purposes, either for scientific research purposes or for interpreting the ranching history of the preserve. And the National Park Service handles planning through a portfolio approach. So this general management plan does not cover livestock grazing specifically. That will be handled in a subsequent vegetation management plan that we hope to complete in future years.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. Next question that we have here is, do the self-guided areas often follow streams? And this person said, they tend to fragment the backcountry areas, but I assume this is primarily for fishing purposes.
Great question. So, Sarah, I don't know if you can share the zoning map again, but I think what the question is referring to are kind of the threads of self-guided zones that cross through the park and intersect with larger polygons of a self-guided zone. Those are actually following administrative roads primarily within the park. And it's another way that we're identifying where mountain biking is more likely to occur. Mountain biking isn't only within those self-guided threads, but in this case, that is also where they occur. But primarily, it's following trails that also serve as administrative vehicle routes. And I'll just speak a little bit more to that point. This is a large landscape. As I referred to a little bit before, the logging legacy of Valles Caldera left the place with over 1,000 miles of logging roads, and most of which we don't use whatsoever. However, there is an administrative network of roads that we use for administrative purposes that also include wildland fire response, and a lot of times these administrative roads serve to provide wildland fire access as well as fire breaks in the event of major wildfires.
Great, thank you for that question. Okay, we'll move on to a question about dispersed camping. So someone asked, for many years we have asked for a dispersed camping program at the Caldera, yet no mention is made of it as far as I know. Would you consider developing a camping program in the final general management plan?
Also a great question. I too am very excited for the day we can announce a dispersed camping program. And we are working on that as a separate planning effort. Will Rempel, the park's outdoor recreation planner, is helping to spearhead that effort. And our hope is that we will explore those options in an upcoming comprehensive trail and backcountry camping plan.
Yep, great question about camping. All right, we'll move on. And then a person asked about the wilderness eligibility assessment and the wild and scenic river eligibility assessment, wondering if there's any updates to either of these assessments or any way to include those issues in this current planning process.
Thanks for that question. To give you a sense of where we stand with both those eligibility assessments, we were able to complete those at the park level in 2024, and the wilderness eligibility assessment came to a preliminary conclusion that approximately 54,000 acres of the park would be eligible for wilderness designation. That accounts for about 61% of the park. And with regard to the Wild and Scenic River eligibility assessment, we identified 67 miles of rivers and streams that would be eligible for Wild and Scenic River designation. Now, with the change in federal administrations, we were not able to get those completed in time during the last administration. And the wilderness eligibility assessment, for example, requires director approval to finalize the wilderness eligibility assessment. Currently, the Park Service does not have a director, and so we're not in a position to be able to finalize that eligibility assessment. Similarly, the Wild and Scenic River eligibility assessment can be signed by the regional director in the Intermountain region, but that position is also vacant right now, so we're not able to finalize that document. So we had to make some hard choices about trying to move forward with the general management plan without those two eligibility assessments being completed. And we decided it was worth moving forward with the GMP while we wait to see when those two documents are finally approved by the director and regional directors.
Great question.
I'll add one last thing to that, which is all of the proposed actions within this plan still keep in mind those eligibility assessments. So while they're not necessarily connected to this plan, nothing in what we are proposing would conflict should those eligibility assessments become finalized in the future.
All right. We'll go to another question, and this one is about new trailheads in the southwest corner of the preserve. And the question is, can you speak more about new trailheads in the southwest corner? Is there a new trailhead proposed at Redondo Meadow?
Great question. Yes. If you can see the map, we are proposing to open what's currently an administrative road slightly into the from the western boundary into Redondo Meadow, where we would establish a new gravel trailhead with most likely something like a vault toilet and some interpretive wayside exhibits. The primary purpose for that is both at Sulphur Springs and at Redondo Meadow, we have visitors currently who are coming up to the park boundary and parking outside of the park boundary on National Forest System lands. And it's beginning to create various conflicts with congestion, blocking gates, and there really isn't any sort of formal established parking in that location. So our belief is that if we are creating an attraction for visitor access, we should take the steps to develop our own infrastructure to accommodate and manage that visitor demand. So the best place for that trailhead in Redondo Meadow is in a disturbed area, just a ways away from the western boundary along that administrative road that would turn into a day use public road.
All right, thank you. All right, now we'll go to a question about the road network. And the question is about the road or trail that connects Sulphur Springs to the existing backcountry road network. And the question is, what is the current condition of this road? And then we have some follow-up. How many miles require reconstruction? Is that road currently used for administrative purposes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, that road is in pretty bad shape, and over the last few years, we've seen further erosion from rain and runoff, large potholes, and areas that really require high clearance four-wheel drive vehicles to get through. It is still used as one of our primary administrative routes for ingress and egress. And our hope is to improve that road, restore the crown of the road, and make it passable by a low clearance vehicle. My guess is it's around 4 miles that need maintenance. There's no major reconstruction, but we need to bring in some fill and level out the road to make it a little bit smoother. And that is currently used as an administrative road, as I mentioned before. I hope I answered all those questions.
I think you did. All right, so let's stay on the topic of roads. And we had someone ask if you could go into more detail about the alignment of the proposed new entrance road.
Sure. So we analyzed a few different options, but ultimately we are proposing to realign the entrance road towards the western side of Valle Grande, hugging South Mountain. And as I mentioned in the presentation, there's 3 primary reasons. One, given where the new visitor services area is going to be located, we wanted to remove vehicles from that viewshed where you would be if you were in that visitor services area. Secondly, the current entrance road enters directly head-on to the Baca Ranch Cabin District, which was recently determined to be eligible for nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. So by moving vehicles out of the center of the Baca Ranch Cabin District, we will have a better opportunity to maintain that historic setting of that potential historic district. And third, the current road network, the entrance road, crosses through really low-lying areas of Valle Grande, right through the heart of Valle Grande. And where it crosses some of these areas, particularly adjacent of the East Fork Jemez River, each spring, particularly during after a high snow year, we experience some significant snow melt that routinely threatens to overtop the road and wash it out. And our concern is that if we have visitors on the north side of that road during a flood event, we would have significant challenges getting those people out, most likely via helicopter, given the situation there. So by moving the road away from the center of the Valle Grande, we'll be able to significantly mitigate those flooding issues. Right now, the route of that realignment is conceptual. The line on the map that is shown is not the precise location where that will be. That will occur at a later point in the planning process, where we look at how to balance various engineering issues, whether it's trying to avoid wetlands, trying to avoid archaeological sites, and trying to identify the right path to get through to the north side of Valle Grande. So that will be analyzed in much more detail at a later time through a subsequent planning process.
All right, I'm going to move on to a question about Sulphur Springs. And the question reads, you mentioned plans for adding parking at Redondo Meadow. Are there similar plans for a parking area near Sulphur Springs? And then kind of follow up, does the Park Service have any control over the Forest Service road to the border of the preserve en route to Sulphur Springs?
Great question. Yes, the same issue, similar to Redondo Meadow, and it's actually more acute at Sulphur Springs in that Sulphur Creek road corridor. We have a lot of visitors who are parking right outside of the Park Service boundary gate, and there really is no parking there, and it's highly congested. We have a number of issues of the road vehicles blocking the road, blocking egress from that gate, and there are no viable options for parking along that narrow canyon right there. So by allowing vehicles to get over to Sulphur Springs, we will identify an area in that general vicinity for a new trailhead parking. Depending on what we explore in subsequent engineering design stages, that parking might be just beyond Sulphur Springs, or it might be adjacent to it. We'll have to see what the road engineers and designers have to say about that. But by providing actual designated trailhead parking, we believe that will definitely address the congestion and conflicts that are starting to arise right at that boundary of the park. And unfortunately, that is Forest Road 105. The National Park Service does not have any responsibility or authority over that road. It is something that I would like to explore how we can partner with the Forest Service to better maintain that road and potentially look at other options to mitigate other concerns that might occur with increased public access of that road. But currently it is a public Forest Service road, and we'll have to work with them on future plans for that.
Right. Okay, let's go back to a question about the entrance road. And this person provided a bit of a comment, so we hope you also provide that to us in writing in the website. But they noted that they have some concerns with the proposed paved new alignment of the entrance road, especially around safe buffer for elk, concerns about passing through wetlands areas. And so the question is, given these concerns, what are the costs and benefits of justifying a new road?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, there are three main issues. One is to address viewshed impacts of the current road based on where the visitor services area will be, enhancing and protecting the historic setting of the Baca Ranch Cabin District. But again, most important and primary of our concerns is the threat of flooding along the current road alignment. That road alignment also runs through many wetland areas, and by narrowing it as a multiple use trail, we would not have to impact any additional wetlands in that area. And in fact, we will probably narrow that existing road to a more narrow trail to improve the areas around that location. As I said before, in the engineering phase of design for that new realignment road, we will be looking at how to mitigate and avoid wetlands, mitigate where we can. But Valle Grande, as many of you would attest, is one giant wetland in many respects. And so there are no good ways of crossing it without impacting wetlands. So we are going to be extremely mindful of what we can do to minimize that effect, as well as we mentioned in the GMP, we've done a significant amount of wetlands restoration within the park unit, and we would continue to do that to offset any impacts that ultimately are necessary for that road.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for that question. Okay, the next question that we have is about The possibility of a management partnership of the tribal area. What is the possibility of a management partnership?
Good question. In the Banco Bonito area, there's already going to be a partnership with Jemez Pueblo in terms of how it's managed. The 2024 settlement agreement discusses that the Park Service can continue. Well, let me back up and say the settlement agreement clarifies and confirms that the National Park Service continues to own and manage Banco Bonito for all citizens and all tribes. And it authorizes the tribe to conduct certain traditional activities of occupancy and use in that area that are consistent with NPS laws and regulations. It also discusses that the Park Service can continue pursuing activities that were in existence at the time that the settlement agreement was signed, and any new activities or proposals need concurrence from the Pueblo of Jemez. So that inevitably is going to create a degree of partnership with Jemez Pueblo as we discuss and look at interests that the Park Service has, interests that the Pueblo has, and collective interests that we both have in managing and operating in that area. So one of the next steps that I believe we'll be working on is developing a management framework jointly with Jemez Pueblo on what that looks like in the future.
Okay. We have another question about the current entrance road, and I think you covered this a little bit, but this question goes into a little bit more detail. And the question is, will the existing alignment of the entrance road, so the existing entrance road, be decommissioned and remediated?
It will be remediated in part, most likely by narrowing the width of that corridor, but we intend to maintain it as a multiple use accessible trail for hiking, equestrian, and mountain biking, as well as cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the wintertime.
Right. All right. Our next question is about a water system at the visitor use area. So this person asked, what's the reality of providing a water system without causing irreversible impact?
Interesting question. We've looked at a few different locations where we can drill a water well, utilizing the water rights that the National Park Service has for the park. And we've identified some areas within Valle Grande that have a high water table and high quality water. So the water system development will involve drilling a groundwater well and then developing a pipeline system to the visitor services area, as well as to the Baca Ranch Cabin District area. And one thing that we did not necessarily cover in this, but the road realignment adjacent to the road, we would also be using to follow a utility corridor that right now there are utility lines along that corridor, and our intention would be to bury all of our utilities, electric, water, and fiber optic for a few reasons. One, by burying the electric lines, we will eliminate additional risk of wildfires in the area. As some of you may remember, the last two major wildfires that occurred in Valles Caldera in 2011 and 2013 were both started by trees falling on uninsulated power lines. And the electric utility line that follows South Mountain carries exactly that same risk of a wildfire start. So by burying all of those utilities along the road corridor, we will eliminate many of those risks. But I don't believe there is any sort of irreversible damage from developing that water system as a whole.
Okay. All right, I'll move on to a question about motorized vehicle use. And the question is, what motorized vehicles will the public be allowed to operate inside the park?
As it stands and currently, and what we would allow going forward would be street legal motor vehicles, sedans, trucks, RVs, buses, school buses, as well as commercial buses through a commercial use authorization. Those would be the ones that we would limit it to as it currently is.
Right. All right. Now we have a question about the Front Country Infrastructure Improvements Project. So the question is, has that been funded, and how does carrying out those activities kind of coordinate with what's in this general management plan?
Yeah, the Front Country Infrastructure Improvement Project informed the development of the draft management plan, because that was approved well before we completed this draft management plan. So everything is in alignment. The one aspect that, well, there's two aspects. We envision that some of these major investments, like a new visitor services area, are going to be 10 years or more on the horizon. And so we needed to improve some of our existing infrastructure in that interim period. The two elements of the Front Country Infrastructure Improvements Project that are more likely to be temporary based on the decisions made in the general management plan would be the location of the parking area within the Baca Ranch Cabin District. At the terminus of the new road realignment would be a parking area behind the Cabin District that's screened by old growth trees in an area that was burned by the 2013 Thompson Ridge fire. And that way we can eliminate vehicles from that view shed within the historic district. And at that time, once that future parking area is built, then we would look at removing that temporary parking area that is being constructed as part of the FCIAP program. The second component is our existing welcome station right in the middle of the Valle Grande. Once the visitor services area is constructed, the entrance booth and fee booth would be relocated to that area, and we would eliminate all of the infrastructure in that location, with the exception of most likely the vault toilet, and continue to use that as a trailhead for the La Loop Trail, as well as trails that go into Valle Grande.
Okay. I did want to note that I think we're nearing the end of the questions that we've received. We have at least one more. So if folks do have additional questions, please type them in. We can give a little bit of space at the end, if there aren't any, to just see if there's some more. So I'll move on to this next question. If the plan is approved as is, what would be the first elements to be accomplished?
That's a great question. I would say most likely it would be the trailheads at South Mountain and Cerro Piñon, which would open up some additional vehicle access without a backcountry vehicle path within the Valle Grande district. Those are likely the next steps that I can envision taking place that would not require substantial investment that would require us waiting 5-10 years or more.
Okay. The next question is about funding, especially for the visitor services area. And the question is, how do you envision funding that? We know that there's budget constraints.
For sure. In the history of the Park Service, budgets have gone up at times, other times they've gone down. During the previous Trump administration, for example, there was legislation passed called the Great American Outdoors Act that created a legacy restoration fund for the Park Service that invested billions of dollars in infrastructure improvements at national parks. So national parks generally are still a bipartisan, have bipartisan support, and there will be funding available for park infrastructure improvements. The Park Service internally has an internal grant program, a competitive grant program, to put it in those terms. And the first step will be to get approval for these investments. And then once we do that, we submit project requests that then we get into a queue and wait for our turn for funding through line item construction, project funds, or other funds that may be available to develop some of these larger investments. There is a competitive process, and a lot of different parks are looking at large investments as well. And so that's where the uncertainty comes in of, will this take 5 years? Will this take 10 years? Will this take more? It all depends on how much funding the Park Service receives each year for construction projects, and what is the backlog of needs throughout the park system. So that's why we can't give you a very clear date or timeline on how long it will take to realize some of these larger investments.
Okay. I'll move on to a question about trail use. And you did touch on this in the presentation, but the question is really about, what does the plan include for trail use and especially for mountain biking?
Yeah, great question. So right now at this stage of the planning process for the GMP, our proposals are to maintain the current trail network that we have right now. And through a subsequent planning effort, we will explore modifications to that trail network in a more concerted effort. Right now, however, we're not short of trails. We have about 130 existing miles of trails, and I'll have to look back at my notes, but if I can remember these numbers off the top of my head, we have about 14 miles of trails that are open to hiking only. We have about 41 miles of trails that are open to hiking and equestrian use. And we have 74 miles of trails that are open to mountain biking. So throughout Valles Caldera, I think mountain biking will remain a strong component of our recreational offerings. And personally, I believe that mountain biking is a great way to explore the park, one of the best ways, in fact. And given the road network that we have from the logging legacy, it offers an opportunity that some other national park units don't have. All that being said, we've been very diligent about trying to look at how we can offer great mountain biking opportunities while also looking at how we protect wilderness values within the park. And the balance that we were able to identify within our wilderness eligibility assessment was that despite the 74 miles of mountain biking routes, or in concert with those, we've also been able to identify 54,000 acres, or about 61% of the park, that would be eligible for wilderness. So we're able to try to strike that balance for both resource protection and recreational needs.
Awesome. All right. We have a question about priority resources for protection. So what park resources currently need priority focus for protection?
For protection, I would say on the cultural resource side, there are a number of historic cabins that are in a lot of need of support and stabilization, improving the envelope of the historic buildings so that they do not deteriorate. Generally, I think of that question more in terms of resources that need to be restored, not necessarily protected in their current state, but restored. And those primarily are forests that some forests that still need to be thinned to reduce highly dense acres of forests. The legacy of cattle grazing and sheep grazing had some significant impacts to wetlands. And so we're going to constantly be working on wetland restoration efforts around the park. And then we have two additional areas of resource impacts that we would very much like to address in the future. One is a network of stock tanks that were developed, basically developing small little ponds throughout landscape. And then finally, as I've mentioned a few times, the 1,000 miles of logging roads certainly has an impact, and we would be looking at, in concert with trail management and road management, what are those logging roads that we could restore, reclaim, so that we eliminate that scar from the landscape and things like that. The last one I would mention, going back to cultural resources, is we have a number of traditional cultural properties and sacred spaces for Native peoples. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge, particularly from a visitor use management standpoint, of how do we protect these areas so that tribes can continue to use these areas for their traditional purposes, but we try to protect them, whether it's from operations, visitor activities, or from changes in climate and erosion. But those are things that we'll continue to look at how we can best protect them.
All right. Okay, we have another question, and this is about the term mechanized corridor. So this person said, I've seen this term used. What can you explain what it means in context of Valles Caldera?
Sure. So generally speaking, when you hear the term mechanized, it may be referencing or alluding to wilderness protections. Wilderness has two primary restrictions, and sometimes these are convoluted or confused. One is prohibition on motorized equipment, and the second prohibition is on mechanized forms of transportation. So anything with some sort of mechanical gears or whatnot are prohibited in wilderness. So that includes not only vehicles, which are mechanized and motorized, but also mountain bikes. Even wheelbarrows are mechanized because they have a wheel. Those are prohibited in wilderness. So if somebody is referring to a mechanized corridor, that would likely mean that it's open to mountain bikes.
All right. Well, with that, I think we've responded to every single question that came in. So I want to thank everybody for participating tonight. Your questions are really thoughtful. I can tell that you know your stuff and you've done some of the research already. And we really look forward to reading your comments and carefully considering them as we take the next steps in this process. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you, Jorge, for the presentation, and have a wonderful evening. We hope to see some of you at some of the events that will be occurring through the rest of the month. And with that, I will say good night and thank you.